Good afternoon. I'm Dmitry Sitkovetsky, and this is Transformation, the Art of Reinvention in the Time of the Pandemic, Q&A with Dima and friends. And what friends I've got today, really, really very special friends. A power couple from Ann Arbor, Michigan. We've got Afa and Afa Dworkin. So it's a rare opportunity when we have both the founder and the president of Sphinx. Welcome.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's really, since I've mentioned Sphinx, and some of the audience here in Europe, they might not know exactly. So one of the questions that I've already noted down, for those of us in Europe who don't know what Sphinx is, could you explain? Aaron, you start, and then after you take over.
Sure. Well, Sphinx is really kind of the leading organization that's focused on these issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts. Ultimately, its overall vision is to transform lives through the power of diversity in the arts. And so that covers a host of programs because it is a complex issue. And so that ranges from programs that are addressing the needs at very early ages in cities like Detroit or Flint, putting instruments, violins in the hands of young kids for the very first time, all the way up through to support systems during middle school and high school summer programs, where students are able to come and get very, very high level of teaching to prepare them to be competitive for the top music schools. And then on to obviously flagship programs like the competition itself, national competition for young Black and Latinx string players, and then also convenings like Sphinx Connect, which is also coming up, which is the international conference. And everyone, no matter where you are around the world, should definitely think about trying to participate in that. And then also artistic ensembles like the Sphinx Symphony, like the Sphinx Virtuosi, which is the touring ensemble. And then Sphinx has been able to be part of actually launching a number of chamber groups. So all in all, a broad breadth of programming, but all of which is fixated on these issues surrounding diversity, equity, and inclusion in the arts.
Fantastic. And just to mention for those who don't know, that you started it almost 25 years ago. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes, that is true. I was actually still an undergraduate student at the University of Michigan, as was Afa. We were friends and in the same violin studio, and began working on it. Afa was the first, kind of employee, so we really joined together, and I think that's also why things were able to transition so smoothly almost 6 years ago when I stepped down from my role with Sphinx to take on a role as dean at the School of Music, Theater, and Dance at Michigan. And Afa, who already had been longtime executive director, assumed the reins. And as you know well, Dima has really just done extraordinary work leading the organization for the past 5 to 6 years.
That's fantastic. That's a good cue for Afa to take over and to tell us also what's been going on this week, and for the last about the Sphinx competition, about the Sphinx conference, and everything that's going on. Please, over to you.
Sure. So in the last handful of years, Sphinx has really doubled down on the social justice and equity aspects of its mission, but really more intentionally has delved into the arts leadership aspects in particular. So 3 years ago, we launched into a number of initiatives that are surrounding reinforcing on our work in the space of artist-centric initiatives, which range from artist grants and career advancement opportunities, also now investing in Sphinx Lead, which is arts administrative leadership program. That's a competitive program we launched now, and we're in our third year of working in that space. And I really, looking at kind of in response to some of the things happening around the world, and particularly in our country, I think artist citizenship has always been important to Sphinx, developing young people who will lead from every seat, whether that's the third seat in the viola section or perhaps the executive chair at an orchestra or presenting house. We want to empower them. And there's not enough representation and diversity, but there's an abundance of talent. And that's really the most exciting piece about my work at Sphinx, is really empowering that talent, shedding light upon it, and really showing the world that talent doesn't know demographics. It's everywhere. And really, I think it's about looking at the fabric of our culture sector, both in this country, but really around the globe, and making sure that voices which have been excluded, maybe intentionally and sometimes not intentionally and more implicitly, are now at the forefront and now have a prime place. So Sphinx Connect is something we're in the middle of preparing for. It's going to launch on the 28th of January. It'll go 28th through 30th. There's no cost barrier to attending. It's our global epicenter for leaders and artists who really believe in equity and diversity work in the performing arts. So it's a great place to hear from some of the most incredible leaders around the world who will talk about their practices and their work surrounding diversity and inclusion. It's also a great place to hear incredible music because all of our plenaries are represented by artists, practicing artists. So it's really just, we do believe artists will lead and will lead the world. And as such, we've provided a platform like that. It's a great chance to hear from some of the youngest speakers that we've been able to prepare and cultivate, all the way to president of Carnegie Hall and Kennedy Center and all the places in between. So a great chance to all convene and share this experience. And of course, as you know, serving on the jury of the Sphinx competition, we've just finished our semi-final rounds of the National Sphinx competition for young Black and Latinx string musicians. And it was just an incredible display of talent. We are forced into the digital space, but it didn't seem to have an effect on how poised and prepared and expressive these young people were. And it was just still just as an emotional an experience. So we're looking forward to January 30th at 7 p.m. Eastern time, which is when they'll compete for the final placement, all 6 of them, and about $100,000 in prizes and scholarships.
That's extraordinary. And I remember a couple of years ago when I was there in Detroit, and during the conference, sort of all those 3 days, which were at that time was live, of course, all the rounds, semifinal and the finals were all live and with orchestra, and just the whole atmosphere was just, one could go every hour to something quite extraordinary, to a master class, to a talk, to a clinic, or this and that, and discussion. And then in the evening, since everybody stayed in the conference center in the hotel, there was a great deal of dancing and partying, and there was a great spirit of really. I saw people that now. What special challenges you've obviously had this year, because it's all done remotely? What were the most difficult? I mean, I can relate to that because I've been doing lots of stuff remotely, but how, with such a scope of, so many people, so many young people and the members of jury, how you met those challenges, how you coped with them?
Yeah, I mean, the hardest part, as you know, as a practicing musician, has been the fact that people have been silenced and the stages have been closed, and there's really been not very much by way of live performing. I think the most pressing challenge has been finding ways at Sphinx for us to sustain our artists and keep our teaching artists on payroll, and frankly find unique and maybe important and relevant ways for artists to continue to have an avenue to perform, whether it's the digital space, whether it's on Zoom or YouTube concerts, and or helping them create fundraisers online for which they'll perform and teach. So that's been the most pressing challenge, and making sure that we look out for every artist. We have more than 800 alumni, so it's a big family to keep track of, and making sure that everyone from members of our professional choir to those who are leading in administrative institutions are doing okay and coping with the circumstances. And of course, also accounting for our youngest members of the family who are enrolled in primary school initiatives like Overture in Detroit and Flint, Michigan. So that's been the biggest challenge. At the same time, this year has offered an amazing opportunity, I think, to expand audiences, help our artists and ourselves as an organization innovate, and find different ways to be heard. We've commissioned, a number of works this year from composers. We held our online gala, which had its global audiences were augmented by almost 1,000%. So that would never happen. We typically hold this at Carnegie Hall Live, and even though we proudly fill the hall, that's 2,800 people, and being able to expand it in such a robust way online has been really tremendous. We've actually been fortunate to pivot all of our programs to the digital space. This past summer, we served almost 100 kids, teenagers, who were selected competitively from a pool that was 3 times as big. And we held programs in partnership with Juilliard and Cleveland School and Curtis Institute, and held lessons in chamber music and individual development, and even everything from eurythmics to public speaking, and these discussion forums that help young people develop a voice other than that on their instrument. Our orchestral training program, which is a program we run in partnership with 88 orchestras around the country, and now 2 from Canada, and hopefully soon perhaps UK orchestras might join us too, that really helps young people of color prepare themselves for professional careers in orchestras. The reach of that program quadrupled literally, because we no longer had the concerns of flying people and instruments into Miami, which is where we typically hold our audition and test intensive. So in that way, we've been able to find new strengths and opportunities, serve a greater number of people and artists, and really focus on what's really most important, which is empowering artists, finding a way for their careers to sustain and persist even during the pandemic. So I'm hopeful. There are definitely logistical challenges and lots of challenges relative to the unknown, but I think there's light at the end of the tunnel. And I think, there's great things to come. It's probably one of the best opportunities for our field to innovate and break some norms and hopefully come back that much stronger.
Fantastic. So it's great to know that they've been surprisingly advantages of being in this really pandemic and in the time when no live concerts, but you found a way to reach much greater audience. In terms of, Aaron, for instance, in terms of fundraising, because you always have to do fundraising, and has it been different in this time? Have you found it more difficult to raise the funds during the pandemic for obvious reasons?
Yeah. So, well, and since I had stepped down from my role with Sphinx, I haven't really been involved in the fundraising side of Sphinx. I have different advisory roles and capacities that I can fill as it can serve the organization. But there has been some involvement in terms of the shows that I'm involved in or things like that. And I would say from that and my understanding from Afa in terms of experiences with Sphinx is that there's certainly, especially, there's certain corporations that because of the nature of their business interests, they just had to cut back. And that's created a tougher environment. And some foundations, based on just where they were at, they might have redirected some resources in certain ways that created some cutbacks, and individuals as well. But I'd say that so kind of in an environment that certainly is rife with some cutbacks and certainly risk and fear, a lot of fear, I think there's also some key advocates for the arts and especially for diversity in the arts who have really stepped up to be able to try and help address some of those significant gaps. And I think especially on the part of Sphinx, that's really enabled Sphinx during this time to create some of these new opportunities for resources for musicians who are specifically being impacted by COVID and the pandemic.
Yeah, because many, as you know, many orchestras don't operate on permanent salaries, and they simply, even the Met went that way. I mean, who would have thought that there's no salary from the best opera house, the biggest opera house in the world, and at the time certainly the best orchestra. And look what happened there. So what can the smaller organizations say? But also, I'm just very curious because there's also was one of the questions I could have asked, because I've been watching and I've been also one of the participants of your new program, of your weekly program, Arts Engines. And it's, what have you overall, now you've done 6 months worth of it, just about. Yeah. So that means probably what, more than 20 programs, right? 25 probably or something.
Oh yeah, we're actually up to about almost 50 programs that we've taped now so far. So
yeah, not all of them. They usually come out one way. With variety people. I mean, the presidents of Kennedy Center, all the major orchestras, interesting arts administrators, and this and that. If you were to make sort of the overall lesson from all of that, what have you, in practical terms, what do you take home from that?
Yeah, so well, it's been a wonderful experience, and I've got my little coffee Arts Engines coffee mug here. But so it comes out every Sunday, and what we wanted to do was that, our industry is filled with those who are these engines, the administrative leaders, leading, as you mentioned, orchestras and presenters, and also academic institutions. Just yesterday, this week's show was with Trey Devi, president of the Interlochen Center for the Arts and the Interlochen Arts Academy, of which I'm a proud alum. And so it was that there are all of these extraordinary administrative leaders, especially many who represent diverse backgrounds and or diverse initiatives that they're working on. But often, unless we're at a conference that once or twice a year, we aren't aware of this extraordinary work that's happening in all of these pockets around the world, because it is an international show. And so we thought, what if we could provide a forum through which we could engage with these leaders, find out about their leadership style, learn any best practices that they have in their approach to their institutions, but also learn about the initiatives they may be working on. How have they been dealing with the pandemic? How are they addressing issues related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, those types of things? And so it's an opportunity for all of those who are leaders in the field to learn from each other throughout the year, and not just a brief time at conference, but then also for all practitioners and those who are audiences and those who appreciate or are interested in the arts, to hear these kind of amazing stories of fascinating people who've dedicated their lives to the arts. So that is Arts Engines, as we say, those who are powering human creativity.
That's been a fantastic series of talks, which you could plan to continue, no doubt, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely, for sure. We're very, very excited, and we already have all of our shows actually booked out through the summer, but then we plan on doing it. And I'd say that's also one of the key things, is that we've joined together in partnership with leading arts institutions across the world. There are, including international partners, and who help us to curate the shows. Who should we be interviewing? What institutions should we make sure that we're incorporating? What issues that are relevant in the field should we be tackling? And so obviously, and we're so excited that Louisiana, Phil, is one of those amazing partners. And now we have about 45 institutional partners for the show all around the world.
Fantastic, including Greensboro Symphony, of course, where we were supposed to meet on stage just next month. And it's going to be a year later, of course, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no. And that's a prime example, right? So when we were able to talk about that, is that there are, so take last week's show with the Toronto Symphony, that there are those that I hear from there who say, oh, I wasn't aware that that's what's happening in Greensboro, that this is this work that Dima's doing. And now I'm learning about what others are doing that I just simply wouldn't have the opportunity, especially during the pandemic. We don't have this connection with each other. And so this opportunity across states, across countries, to be able to do that. One of our partners, Trinity Laban, and conservatories also learning from orchestras. So there's really this interesting cross-section, and that has really led to kind of this kind of catalyst that I think the show has served, because I've heard from a number of people who say, I learned this from Greensboro, from Dima. I've learned this from Toronto. I've learned this from New York or Louisiana or wherever it is. And these have all come together to further the work that everyone is doing in the field.
Wonderful, wonderful. I'd like to come back at some point a little later to the American Rhapsody, which we're doing together, because I love you to talk about it. But at the moment, I would love to just change gears and ask this question. Both of you met playing in an orchestra, as you mentioned, in Interlaken, wasn't it? Or was it at the university? So you both are colleagues of mine, you're both violinists. And so there's an interesting question later on about that, but just a personal one. You came from two completely different cultures. And Afa, of course, grew up in the place where I was born, Baku, Azerbaijan. And so that's another area of mutual interest. When you, how the question goes, how hard or easy was it to reconcile the different cultures and musical traditions to form one vision between the two of you? Afa, you start, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think in some ways, although we have a good deal of mix of diversity between the two of us, I think in many ways, there was something extremely relatable and similar and dear from the very early days of our friendship and stand partnership in an orchestra, in that actually our musical families and our musical heritage is not so divergent. We both come from the Russian violin school, and that is how Aaron was trained ever since he was very young. And those are my roots. As you know, my violin school is, I've been fortunate to have training from folks who are graduates of Moscow Conservatory and the Conservatory at home. So in that way, our foundation was extremely similar. I think maybe some of the surrounding context of us coming up as young people was a bit different. But I don't think it played any effect in adding difficulty. I think if anything, it added competency to each one of us. And we found, I think, the journey, including our friendship and personal relationship, which was to emerge much later, but also even relative to our musical approaches, to be very complementary. I've always been a new music buff and somebody who has loved that research and kind of wanting to play a lot of music by new composers. And Aaron had a great deal of love for traditional repertoire, but also introduced me to music that was both written during the contemporaries of Mozart and Beethoven, as well as music that was created more in the 20th century by composers of color, of whom I did not know. So for me, it was an opportunity, an immense opportunity that introduced me to a whole series of endless volumes of really excellent music that's been buried or entirely ignored and not studied. And that was just the beginning. So that was probably the most remarkable thing. And I think ultimately, I would say buying into Aaron's early vision of Sphinx was not, it was not difficult at all. Because we come from the background, as you know, where music and its study and its benefits were afforded to young people without regard to their zip code or ethnic background, or the many mixes of ethnic background, as in my case. And as such, study of music was something that's afforded to a young person. So being able to see that Aaron was after equity of access and then empowerment of voices that just needed to be heard was easy. And that equity and social justice aspect of Sphinx is something that was incredibly clear, moving, and so compelling. That I was, as stubborn a person as I am, I was able to and found myself departing from my heretofore pretty clear and traditional pathway of a career that I laid out for myself, and really turn into helping to build something that was so special and so timely and so important. So that's kind of my lengthy answer.
That's a wonderful. I'm just wondering, with having such powerhouse parents, how does that affect till this day, because they're not yet completely grown, your two boys? How has it been for them, to have such high achievers as parents? Because, I personally was born in a family of super high achievers. Unfortunately, my father died very young. But you know, when you don't, when you have a legend, and that's even harder to measure up. So I just try. I'm trying to relate to those boys who I have not met yet, but one is very close to my heart because he's a Chelsea supporter, of course. And right now, I thought actually of asking you. So it's such a momentous time. You know, everybody knows what's going on in Washington and what's going to happen on Wednesday. But as we speak in Russia, Alexei Navalny, is landing in Moscow, and that's a very moment. And I was going to say, and what's happening in UK? Very important. Manchester United, Liverpool. That's what's happening here, because that's about the only game we have live. You know, the football is the only thing that's allowed to be. Yeah. So that's a little diversion. But really, tell me about the boys. How was it for them to, you know, to measure up and to live up? You know,
I would say we're not remotely as legendary as your family. So it's but I think I hope we've been doing a good job in that they both played and studied. Although, you know, our eldest Noah, who's now about to graduate from college and majoring in business at Michigan, you know, ended up, you know, stopping playing. And I would say for our youngest, Amani, while he is still working the keyboard and doing very well at it, you know, we don't necessarily think it'll be the primary, you know, professional path that he wants to follow. So in that way, you know, are they kind of following in some of those direct footsteps? No, but I would say that they both have this passion and interest for what they want to bring to the world. And so I feel like we've done a good job in instilling that in them. And I think they have a good sense of the balance. I think they view our work as our life's work, that it's this passion. I think they view us and that they view having parents whose work is something that they love and is part of their life. It's not a job, that it's kind of a calling for us. And I think I see both of them wanting to find that in their own lives and emulate that. And so that, I think, is a good thing. I don't know, Af, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's tough to tell what they actually think. If there was one quality that I would hope they would tap into, like when I reflect back to the ways in which I was raised in a mixed family where my mom, who's still around and lives in Baku, and she's Azeri, and mom comes from a family of academics. My father, who's not with us, but was a chemical engineer, and his family is Persian Jewish. And I would say one thing that was particularly characteristic to both of them and something they aimed to impart upon both my sister and myself was his commitment to good work ethic, really relentless work ethic. So if there was one singular lesson that I hope our boys take with them and pass along onward and really persist and stick to and stick with, that would be work ethic. Everything else will come. I think that it will, even if they should change the angle of their passion or specific craft or area of study that they end up falling in love with later in life. I think all of that is part of the journey, but the good work ethic is something that's that I hope we've been able to maybe model and hopefully leave for them.
I think I couldn't agree more, because there's certain things, you know, that you can it sort of diminishes things that you can actually teach directly. Mm-hmm. But indirectly, just by example, just by being the way you are and being in that atmosphere, being in the same space with you for good, you know, first 18 years, let's say.
Nice stretch.
used to be longer, and sometimes it's still longer. But now actually younger people like to stay because they don't want to pay the rent. You know, it's too expensive, and it's nice and comfortable to stay with parents. So it sort of comes back, you know. before it was, oh, I want to leave, be on my own. But in any case, also from my example, something that I realized only much later, that my mother's work ethics, something we never even talked about. But this is something, I grew up under her piano, and I thought everybody in the music business was like her. That in order to aspire to anything, in the profession of music, you had to be like her. She was always 150% prepared for. She was never late in her life. She was, she was incredibly meticulously prepared. I thought everybody was like that. Later on, I found out it's not true. She was actually quite an exception. But, I didn't know, because you learn that from, by osmosis in a way. It's more than anything. She could have given me a lecture and I'd say, oh, yeah, sure. Like we know anything compared to the teenagers. Yeah. But that's fantastic. Let me ask you then, there were a couple of related things. Yes, you probably never spend as much time at home as in 2020, as always, right? What have you learned about yourself by being also in your family so much? Because you both travel, I know, because I've met, Afa in Miami, New York, and in California, first time we met. It's a big traveling lifestyle. Maybe not as exhausting, as extreme as mine. Mine was really ridiculous, but that's all evened out now. We're all safely in one place. But what has been, obviously there's a lot of positive, but what I mean is more personal. What have you learned? Because there was a lot more time for contemplation, for reflection, also for interaction with your children, between yourself and everything. Anything, Afa, you start, and then Aaron, you continue.
Yeah, I mean, there are many gifts that have come along with this forced pandemic, which has otherwise created plenty of tragedy and loss. Yeah. For us, probably on a personal level, I would say, I think we might have found that we might enjoy one another's company in a way that's uninterrupted, more than ever before, because there's that imposition of staying home. So we found both conversations and activities that are important, intriguing, and really provide for an enjoyable time together. It's been a blessing to be at home with our youngest, since he's the only one home anymore, and just watch him grow in so many different ways as a young person, as a thinker, as somebody who has found ways to express themselves and create a critical thought, particularly because in our time of the pandemic over the past year, there have been so many other catalyzing events that relate to race relations and a lot of other deep-seated areas of divergence and unrest that are true for this country. It's true for a lot of the world, but of course, there have been a lot of very important events. So spending time with our children, and the youngest one in particular, and seeing him grow has been a gift. And I think we've improved our culinary skills since we've had more of an opportunity to be intentional about our cooking and maybe a little bit more adventurous.
You're way too kind to say we. You have been extraordinary. It's just been so incredible, actually. Afa's engaged in some really extraordinary adventures and developed some amazing dishes. And we always work on things together, but I do more cleaning. And she does more architecting and creation. That is amazing.
There you go. We divide and conquer. Yeah. And I think the other piece that comes with both, I think as a result of creativity from two people, but also inventing when the necessity dictates, to paraphrase an adage, I think we've designated certain areas of our home, both inside and outside, as areas that we go out to and dress up for, and even places where we enjoy a meal together or a conversation together, because I think we've had to reinvent how we view space. And that's been a really interesting journey too. Aaron's been the bigger architect there. So I'm going to yield here and see what you want to add.
I was going to add, we've discovered a lot of new wine. So that's what. But yeah, no, that was one of the things when we realized we weren't going anywhere. And we used to just, we're big foodies. So yes, we have certainly cooked and ate at home more in the past, 9 months than ever before in our lives. And I would say to a major extent, I would say over the past 9 months, we have probably only ordered food in maybe 4 or 5 times total. So we have eaten at home a lot and a lot of home food. And so that exploration, we then began to want to feel like different places and to emulate places that we otherwise might go out to. So when the weather was still nice, we did that out, and finding kind of a place in the backyard that actually became our Parisian cafe. And we have a Sonos speaker out there. So we would just play, various music, always from France. So we would, just explore French music whenever we were in that space. So we would feel like we were in a French cafe. And then we have kind of an indoor space that's got a higher ceiling. And so created a space there. And then literally actually created a little space in our bedroom where we also sometimes eat and sit as if it's kind of a special little place that, weird house restaurant kind of thing. So in other words, we've really been just creative with trying to create spaces, as well as amazing food and all of that. And then always encompassing music. So the music is always an important part of that. And sometimes we pair the music with the food that we're eating, those kinds of things. And so do that. And then probably the last thing I'd say is exploration of especially African-American area and Black wineries. And so exploring some of the extraordinary wines out there that we previously hadn't been aware of. And now a lot of it's very difficult to get a hold of. Which is wonderful that they've become so much in demand and they can't meet the demand. And that's a long time threshold to prepare in the wine business to get your stocks up. So that's been another kind of great thing. And so in that, we are very, very appreciative. It's absolutely changed our personal interactions and our personal life in a way that I think and I hope we will continue even when we have the opportunity to go out to restaurants again.
Exactly. So you've become closer and on many levels a lot more inventive and creative, given as you said, necessity is the mother of invention, because we just have to put our creative cap on and do something that I never thought I would be doing, distant recordings with my chamber orchestra, which has been going on. And this is incredibly complex to do, but incredibly satisfying. And there's the documents there. And I never thought that, one of the cycles of 7, Bukovina songs by a living composer, Leonid Desatnikov, had something like 200,000 views, on Facebook, and now it's also on YouTube and things like that. I mean, you reach ultimately bigger number, and I have now. We have a special people on Facebook from Ukraine or Romania, because now Bukovina is actually between those two countries. Yeah. So you discover and you explore new territory. So now let's imagine, because there's one question that it was very interesting to me. If you were both still violinists in their late 20s today, which is when you met, what would you be doing now? I mean, your situation would be quite different than you are where you are. Imagine, what would be your aspirations, hopes, and also what would you recommend if you see yourself in that? You're doing a lot for young people, but anyway, but just imagine that, you're still in your 20s, you had all these aspirations, and now. Afa?
Sure.
Or Aaron, which, whoever. Yeah.
Well, yeah. No, I was just going to clarify. So, and if we were that age and we're practicing violin, we're continuing with violin performance.
Aspiring violinists. I mean,
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
could be
Yeah.
playing in the orchestra, but you had maybe solo aspiration, maybe chamber music with string quartet, anything.
Right.
I mean, if your life would turn out to be there, but it would happen now, and with the
Right.
pandemic, which happened to so many stories that I know and so many young people, what would you be doing?
That's a fun thing to imagine. So for me, in fact, in some other life, perhaps there'd be time to do it. For me, I would form a fluid chamber group that wouldn't not just the string quartet or an octet, but a fluid one in that the membership of it would rotate depending upon repertoire and be able to play a lot of new music. But in particular, I would form it now amidst the pandemic, get to know each of the target musicians I want to collaborate with, create this roster. What I would really, really sink my teeth into in a significant way is dedicate myself to discovery of and hopefully creation of new repertoire by composers of color. And what I would do as a violinist, because pedagogy and repertoire research have always been important to me when I still played actively, it's still important, but I don't get to spend so much direct time. I would take the time to research and partner with a million people around the country who are doing this work, just bits and pieces, to create a catalog of literature that exists, separated by hopefully age groups and categories that apply to individual string instruments. I'd probably start with violin just because I'm biased. Figure out what exists, where it is, so that it becomes a searchable catalog, and figure out where the holes are. What are we missing? What maybe does not exist as many standalone concertos by, say, Black and Brown composers? And perhaps if there were some, what might it take to commission them? And do everything I can, work with composers and musicians and artists everywhere to help fill in those gaps, complete. There's no way to complete it, but I'd work really hard to assemble all of this information and continue to work on it, and then offer it as a service to teaching colleagues across the world and musicians across the world, so that my chamber group, where I'd be one of the violinists, would pioneer these new works by living composers with an emphasis on composers of color, but also at the same time, the world of pedagogy would get their hands on something that really deserves to be part of the canon and has not been. I think it's a big missing opportunity, and I'd probably have a lot of fun doing it.
Great. That sounds like a wonderful plan. What about you, Aaron?
Well, in terms of the dream as a violinist, this was the dream going into my early 20s, mid 20s for sure. Probably before I ended up transferring to Michigan, which was that I was going to, win the Tchaikovsky and be the first American, be the first Black person. And with that, so what was interesting is that I wanted to be the world's greatest soloist, right? But there was always an underlying purpose. So the goal wasn't to be a soloist. The goal was to be the best soloist in the world, so that these things could happen. And so it was interesting, before even the remotest idea of Sphinx, I wanted to win Tchaikovsky, not to be the best violinist, but because with that, what I thought, and this is going back when I was a kid, was that it would bring America and the Soviet Union together, and there would no longer be this international conflict. And because I was Black, it would bring together white and Black people. There wouldn't be racial strife anymore. So underlying everything was this idea that music could do those things, but that I very individually, and this was the ego, I could be the vessel through which, right, all of that would happen. So grand goals that never were to come to pass. And then the other thing that also I was doing in my mid-20s, which is a little bit similar to Afa, but a little bit different, which is chamber music, but actually a very fixed chamber group. I did like the idea of getting together and really intimately getting to know those who you're playing chamber with music with, and just inside and out, you know, where you can just absolutely predict what they're going to bring from their instrument, how you're going to respond. You're just literally dancing together with your music. And but to do that, incorporating different genres and disciplines. So I was arranging, you know, R&B and hip hop for string quartet and doing different things like that. Being able to take that further and explore that and kind of break down some of these barriers between genres of music. That was something that I think was a passion. And now, of course, I see some artists doing it and doing it far better than I think I ever could have. So
great effect. Of course, the $1,000,000 question now would be, you know, for young people with such aspiration, who would be footing the bill? Where, how do you make a living doing that? You know, because when at that time you were students and, you know, you could live in, but now being so, you know, constrained by what income, where, you know, and unless you have a salary that's coming your way if you're lucky. But for the young people, that's certainly not the case. So what would be your suggestion? Because one of the questions anyway was somewhat related. What's the best way for the young performers to be heard and noticed today? Is it still competitions, auditions, or now more online material like website, YouTube? You know, somebody even asked, I remember in some of the previous talks, you know, do you need to have like a portfolio, like parallel skills, which you've certainly developed and created some of those. What would be your suggestions for those who do not have, you know, who are not part of your extended family, also recipients of the grants and everything? I mean, just people out there sort of wondering what's going to, should I really continue my aspiration? Should I give it up? You know, because it's been quite a psychologically very, very strenuous time. I mean, we are old fighters, not because you're old, but I'm sort of, you know, mature. But I mean, I've left Soviet Union, I started new life. I have experience of something like that. Also experience of long time not performing in between my immigration and first time here. But for young people, they don't know it. And all of a sudden, boom, the door is shut. What to do? So what would be your, you know, your advice, your suggestions, because you're so resourceful, both of you?
Well, one of the things, I mean, I think in many ways, following in your footsteps, Dima, right? They should look and see those types of things that you've done. So for, you know, you mentioned all of this transition to digital that you did, right? And now all of a sudden reaching 200,000. So a big thing that I encourage, especially to my students in entrepreneurship, is to look at that. So obviously there are those, if you want that orchestra gig, if you want to be part of an orchestra and part of that collective, you know, 100 people being brought together by someone like you and making music, then go for that. I think, yes, highly competitive to get one of the big orchestra jobs, but go for it, do it, and for sure pursue that if that's what brings you that lifeblood. Same thing if what fuels you is teaching. And, you know, pursue the big college teaching job, et cetera. The standard traditional tracks, I don't think we should just toss away. And I think those who are committed to that should certainly pursue that. And understanding, just like you mentioned, there'll be a portfolio component, there'll be other things that they do. But that, by definition, is a very, very, very small subset of all of those who are studying music. Just because of the availability, but also growing, certainly I see in my students, less interest in having just such a narrow path. And instead, they want to begin to build this breadth. And which, by the way, I feel like you are very, very unique in this breadth that you've built of all of the things that you do. And so again, I think it's a really strong example for them. But so looking at digital and looking very pragmatic, like you mentioned, about how are they going to keep a roof over their heads and make money while they're making music. Exactly. If they just look at that and say with a chamber group, they don't need a big following, they don't need management, they don't even need to be engaged by any presenters, right? They can bring that online in a digital space. And if they have those skill sets and they're doing something with their music that, no pun intended, resonates with people, you only need very few people who support you. So I encourage them to look at, for example, Patreon or any of these online platforms where they could just build a following. Because if, let's just say, forget about big millions of YouTube views and all of that, or even 200,000, you just have 1,000 people. And those 1,000 people love this work that you're doing. And you can engage them and show them how, with what you're going to produce, maybe a monthly concert, and that they're willing to be charged $10 a month and have a subscription to that, then all of a sudden, that's $120,000 a year income for you as a musician. Just cultivating 1,000 people who love your artistry. So you don't need millions of people. You don't even need hundreds of thousands. You could have a relatively small but dedicated, where you've made that connection as an artist with them and you cultivate them, and you can absolutely make an amazing living. So the opportunity to be a performing artist where your art is what pays the bills, I think has never been greater, the opportunities. And it's just a matter, though, that there's more responsibility on you. Long gone are the days you find a manager, and that's it. Your career's set, you're with one of the big agencies, and that's it. And all you do is worry about your art. For 99.9%, you have to do this engagement. You have to understand social media, and you have to be the architect of your own audience. And so it's an opportunity, but also a responsibility.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think it's a great advice. Afa, can you add anything to it?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think one of the things you mentioned that was really critical, the development of other skills, and it no longer, I think gone are also the days not only of being able to secure a manager and then have your life set, but also gone are also the days when you audition for an orchestra and maybe get the gig and you're all set. It's no longer sufficient. You now have to have other skill sets. You need to be able to speak about the music you're playing. You need to be an ambassador for the art that you carry and bring to the community. So developing some of those basic skills is essential. Being your own business manager now, being able to balance your budget and forecast it and understand what it should take to have a successful enterprise in order to have a singing career or portfolio career or a teaching career is extremely important. I think the opportunities to teach now are more significant. The kinds of creativity I've seen teaching artists apply today in the digital space have been really impressive. And the kinds of things and also seeing what's being developed now by way of being able to teach group lessons in a digital space, even though the technology is lagging behind, but I think some of the concepts are there. So I think, how amazing would it be if, coming out of this pandemic, some of the technology caught up and maybe the leadership of that came from artists themselves, inventing in a space where there's gaps and opportunities. So I think the developing of other skills is no longer a nice elective. It's now an essential. It should not be such a rarely found talent that you can get on stage and talk about what you're doing. That's expected anymore. And of course, you know that very well. And of course, I think there's also a great deal of opportunities now to be heard in spaces and places who are looking for some of this new music, new voices, more diverse programming, interesting music, opportunities to infuse what is the canon and what is the tradition with things that are deserving but new. And important and relevant. So to me, sky's the limit, and there's so many chances for musicians now to find themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had an interesting interview earlier for my orchestra for the Greensboro Symphony with one of Sphinx alumni, Kelly Hope Tompkins, and what a great success her program, music's the kitchen kitchen for the soul, in home shelters. Fantastic. I mean, how she started, and in 15 years, and now she spent she made 15 commissions for people to write during the pandemic. I mean, she's never been as active as in this. So that's already a result. And then, of course, you have to start somewhere. And now it's been a wonderful time for her to to bear the fruit of her efforts. I know you've got other commitments coming soon, but really I want to thank you for finding the time. Afa is in the middle of the Sphinx competition. You're about to do this big thing. I'm so happy to be part of it. I'm looking forward to next couple of weeks still being very involved with all of that. And Aaron, it's just you always such an inspiration, and you really both are very special. I hold you very close to my heart. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you in flesh and blood before too long. The vaccine is coming. Actually,
it's coming.
Coming. Close. My mother's getting it in a week, so that's already in New York. Yeah, the first one, and then 3 weeks later. And this is the one wave which will change our present situation. So let's hope to see you, of course, online. I'll see you already next week, Afa, but really in flesh and blood and on stage. We didn't have enough time to.
I am so looking forward to coming to Greensboro. We are going to have a lot of fun. So
wonderful time, and Afa has to come along.
Absolutely,
really something special. Thanks so much. It's been a great pleasure and a privilege to have you.
It's our honor. Great to be.
Thanks so much.